Hey everyone, welcome to week 22. Wow. Module 4 is starting. I want to draw your first attention to the fact that there's 2 weeks of content and then we move straight into the TMA. So this is quite a quick one, and then afterwards it's the EMA. So quite condensed, 2 weeks of content, 3 weeks to complete the TMA, although there is a week off in the middle of that. So you do have some respite, hopefully. There's a few things I want to note in the module itself, or for this week anyways. It's all about a global thinking about design, and that can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. It can feel kind of abstract as you're going through. If you ever feel a bit, taken aback and a bit confused by what they're talking about in the module, bring it back to objects. Objects are like the embodiment of culture. They're all around us and they do a really good job of sort of demonstrating culture. Culture a lot of times is about practices or knowledge that was available, and resources and history. So if you think about, let's say, drinking a pint in a pub in the UK is quite cultural. A lot of that has to do with the fact that you couldn't drink water in London for a while, so all you could drink was beer, and they didn't have individual bottling, or that wasn't really accessible to everyone. So you would go to a location to basically drink. Whereas in France, beer isn't as much of a thing. It's a lot more about wine, and that's because the temperature and the soil conditions were perfect for vineyards. So just keeping that in mind when you feel a bit confused by what's going on in the module, just bring it back to things that make sense to you. The same as like Scandinavian design. We know what that means, and it has a lot to do with the pine trees that are a resource that's readily available in northern countries. So keep that in mind. Then there's a part where they talk about end of life architecture, or the fact that architecture has sort of this long standing influence. It's very true, and it's something to really think about. The way that we design things now isn't just for today, sometimes it is for longevity. Let's say you design a theater 200 years ago in the West End, and it's got these big sweeping staircases all around it, and you've got this big ballroom in the middle as the entrance. It's really beautiful, and it's very like Princess Bride kind of thing, Princess Diaries. And that's a terrible example still. Anyways, and you have this really beautiful theater for a long time, but then a hotel developer buys it now because you need places to stay in London, and you may realize in terms of accessibility from that perspective, these big sweeping staircases are really beautiful. But when you arrive from an airport with your passport, your wallet in your hand, your phone, you've got your coat over your shoulder, you've got two sets of suitcases, and you look at the staircase and think like, ooh, this isn't very inviting because I don't know how to get up there. And maybe when it was built 200 years ago, there weren't really elevators, or there weren't standards to how elevator sizes should be. So even if you do have one, it might be really small, so you won't be able to use it. So that's kind of some of the restrictions of end of life, some of the things that you need to think about. There's just lots and lots of examples around the world of that. It's just something to consider when you're designing for big projects that last a very long time. Finally, I do want to point out there's some examples, again, with the sort of like abstract concepts. There's some references to Hofstadter and Hall, who are sort of cultural sociologists. They're real pinnacles in these ideas, but from like 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that was around a time where industrialization was really big. Some like concepts around research that we won't get into are really big. And it meant that everyone really wanted to generalize everything, so make everything just make sense and see people or behaviors as this like repeatable, scalable system that can comply with like capitalism or the industrial scale. So keep a grain of salt in that, because some of the thinking behind that is kind of it's quite dated and it's quite obsolete now, especially when, as you'll see with globalization, because we have access to things, because we have an ability to share knowledge and share resources a lot more easily, you don't see culture in that sort of black and white way as you did 200 years ago. Looking at for instance, the way that buildings were made, or residential homes, were designed before, you can really see these cultural differences between different countries or different areas around the world. Whereas nowadays, if you look at apartment buildings and the way that they're built, everyone sort of has the same knowledge or abilities or resources around the world. So a lot of times they'll end up influencing each other and they'll look sort of the same. You see that like in the early 2000s, everything was made of like glass and steel and aluminum, and it still lingers on today. But then like now, it's all those big, big windows and everyone has them everywhere. So it's sort of these like sweeping globalized forms of culture. So it's just something else to think about. But that being said, there are really beautiful little pockets or niches, and you can think about that as well. Look at your own town or where you grew up, and look at how some of the cultures or practices around there are different to other places in the UK. Think about the Cornish pasty and how that has a cultural effect. It came because of miners and like keeping their food clean, and how that is sort of become a cultural element there, whereas there may be something where you live that's really quintessential to where you are. So keep those things in mind when you start getting a bit confused with globalization and culture and global contexts. Just bring it back down to who you are or things that are around you, and that'll help make a lot of sense. Otherwise, there's a tutorial Saturday for those who want to attend. Fantastic. I think we're going to do a lot more sketching and a lot more just like drawing. It'll be a bit more maybe chill. So when and if you decide to come, keep that in mind and bring some paper, some pens, some pencils, anything you want to draw with, and we'll be talking about culture, globalization, and some of the different ways to interact with culture in your design. So that's it for me. Hope you have a very good week, and I will update you all on the TMAs as I start grading them this week. So till then, see you.